tonight we'll drift into a story that may sound a little peculiar at first, but that's the charm of it, isn't it? We'll wander back to 1892 when something as simple as buttoning your coat the wrong way could turn a few heads, or even spark whispered scandal in polite society. Dim your light, settle under your blanket and let your breathing slow. Let the day fall away like a coat slipping gently from your shoulders. And as you sink into this quiet moment, I wonder, where in the world are you listening from tonight? And what time is it there, in your own calm corner? If this calm journey helps you unwind, tap like and subscribe. Only if it feels right, of course. No pressure. Just an invitation. Imagine now a soft hum of a fireplace in the distance, a faint scent of wood smoke and the hush of the night pressing kindly against your window. We're going to stroll through history, not the loud battlefield kind of history, but the quiet everyday kind, the kind you could almost miss, like a coat buttoned slightly askew. Let me tell you about the winter of 1892. Picture the streets of London slick with rain, the cobblestones gleaming under flickering gaslight. Imagine a man hurrying home from work, his coat pulled tight against the damp evening air. He buttons it in a rush, top to bottom, but just a little off. The second button slips into the third hole. Tiny mistake. You might smile at it today, shrug, and think, "Ah well, he's tired." But in that year, in that city, such a mistake could mark him as careless, sloppy, or worse. Someone who didn't respect the delicate codes of appearance. I can almost hear the shuffle of boots, the rustle of long skirts brushing past him. Perhaps a passerby notices, eyebrows arching ever so slightly, as though he'd walked out carrying a loaf of bread under his hat. Why such a fuss, you wonder? Why should a button matter? Well, that's exactly where our journey begins. The world of clothing in 1892 wasn't just fabric and thread, it was a language. To misbutton your coat was to mispronounce a word in that language. Subtle but noticeable, like ordering tea and accidentally asking for gravy. People laughed about it, of course, but not always kindly. Imagine going to a dinner party, stepping into a warm parlour where the fire crackles and the smell of roasted chestnuts hangs in the air, only to realise that your coat is off by one button. It feels like walking in with spinach in your teeth, or your shoelaces tied together. But it's not just embarrassment. Back then, appearances were tied to morality. The Victorians loved order, symmetry, and propriety. A misbuttoned coat suggested you lacked discipline, and discipline was everything. They thought if you couldn't manage your buttons, how could you manage your life? Let me set the scene even deeper. Picture yourself stepping into a bakery in 1892. The bell over the door gives a gentle chime. The air is warm and sweet, heavy with the scent of sugared buns and treacle tarts. You breathe it in, cheeks flushed from the cold. The baker's assistant glances up, nods politely, then pauses. Their eyes flicker, just for a second, down to your coat, misbuttoned. The warmth you felt falters. You're suddenly aware of your fingers, of the way the coat pinches oddly at the side. It's not just a coat anymore, it's a statement. Isn't it strange how something so small could matter so much? And yet, isn't that the story of so many things? A spoonful too much salt in a stew, a letter left unsent, a button slipped into the wrong hole, tiny things, snowflakes that gather into avalanches. Now let's add a touch of humour, because history can always use a smile. There were even jokes about misbuttoning in the papers. One columnist in 1892 compared it to eating soup with the handle of the spoon. Can you picture it? A diner lifting the wrong end of the spoon, struggling earnestly. That was the misbuttoned man, ridiculous without meaning to be. As the gas lamps flicker outside and the carriages rattle by, imagine yourself among these people. You adjust your collar, perhaps brush a bit of soot from your sleeve. You think of the rules, the unspoken codes, and you wonder, who made them up in the first place? Who decided that a crooked line of buttons could be a social crime? The answer, as it so often is in history, lies in habit, in imitation, in the quiet weight of tradition. Coats had been cut and designed to align neatly for centuries. Buttonholes were not just practical, they were signals of craftsmanship, of symmetry, of order. A misaligned row disrupted the whole effect, like a picture frame hung just a little askew in an otherwise tidy parlour. Some people could not resist straightening it. Others, they just whispered. And so, dear listener, as you breathe in slowly and let your body relax, think of that man in 1892, walking the wet streets with his coat crookedly fastened. Perhaps he was a banker, distracted by numbers. Perhaps a baker's son, rushing home with a parcel of day-old bread. Whoever he was, he carried more than just a button out of place. He carried the weight of a world that noticed, that judged, that found meaning in the smallest of details. And as we leave that rain-slick street behind, let your mind wander to another place, another table, another taste. For misbuttoning a coat was just one thread in a tapestry of curious customs. There were treats to taste, stories to savour, and odd delicacies to ponder. Picture yourself now stepping away from the rain-slick streets of London, where that crooked button once sparked whispers, and into the soft warmth of a Paris cafe in the very same year, 1892. The air hums with the low murmur of French voices, the faint scrape of chairs across tiled floors, and the delicate clinking of porcelain cups. A sweet aroma drifts from the counter. Fresh brioche, golden and buttered, still steaming from the oven. Let me tell you, in Paris the misbuttoned coat was seen a little differently. Not entirely forgiven, but softened by the city's love for eccentricity. Imagine a painter arriving late, coat slightly off-kilter, bray pushed back on his head. Instead of scandal, it became a kind of charm. In a place where absinthe swirled in green glasses and new art movements bloomed in smoky corners, a crooked line of buttons almost fit the aesthetic. Isn't it funny how one city might treat it as a crime, and another as a quirk? It's like biting into a croissant, flaky, light and indulgent, compared to the dense, butter-packed scone in London. Both baked goods, both beloved, but each judged by its own local standard. The cafe's windows fog slightly from the warmth within, and you can hear the faint shuffle of horse-drawn carriages outside. Somewhere, a violin is being played, the notes floating in through the half-open door. The coat, however misaligned, becomes just part of the story. Perhaps a waiter notices and smiles politely. Perhaps no one cares at all. After all, Paris was already experimenting with breaking rules in art, in literature, even in fashion. Why not buttons too? Still, there were moments when appearance mattered. On the grand boulevards lined with gas lamps and shop fronts glittering with silk gowns, one might still catch a raised brow. But even then, the French had a way of turning judgment into style. A poet might deliberately misbutton, just as he might wear his scarf in an unconventional knot, to signal individuality. To say, without words, I am not like the rest. Have you ever tried it yourself? Doing something slightly off, just to feel the freedom of it? Wearing mismatched socks on purpose? Putting sugar before tea in the cup just because you can? It's a small rebellion, like humming a tune when silence is expected. And in that Paris cafe of 1892, as brioche crumbs scatter on small white plates and the golden glow of gaslight softens every shadow, the misbuttoned coat becomes less a mistake, more a statement. A reminder that rules are only rules until someone dares to bend them. And as we let the cafe fade, let your mind wander now to another corner of the world, another table, another bite of something strange and unexpected. The story of a misbuttoned coat is only just beginning, and history has so many flavours yet to offer. Imagine, if you will, the steady rhythm of a train rolling through the German countryside in 1892. The carriage rocks gently, like a cradle for the weary traveller, and outside the window, the bare winter trees blur past. Steam curls upward, white against the steel-grey sky, and coal smoke drifts back into the compartments, leaving that faint metallic tang that clings to wool coats and leather boots. Inside, the benches creak and the low murmur of passengers blends with the clatter of wheels on the track. It is a world balanced on rails, measured in timetables and whistles, a world that prizes order. And in such a world, misbuttoning your coat was not a small mistake. No, here in Germany, it was something of a disruption, like hearing a violinist in a concert hall stumble on one sour note. Precision was the heartbeat of society. The trains, after all, were famous even then for their punctuality. The factories in Berlin hummed with machines that demanded discipline. Even the military drills, with boots striking the ground in unison, reflected a culture where every detail mattered. To button your coat incorrectly was to step out of that rhythm, and people noticed. Picture a schoolteacher, Herr Müller, standing before his students. He smooths his moustache, clears his throat, and adjusts his frock coat, only to realize too late that the buttons are uneven. One slips into the wrong hole. The line wavers across his chest. His students glance up from their slates, and though not a word is said, the air thickens with the quiet amusement of children who have just caught their master in an error. Isn't it funny how a single detail can change the entire room? The lesson is the same. The chalk squeaks the same on the board, and yet his authority feels just a little less solid, a tiny crack in the wall. I can almost hear your mind ask, could a crooked button really matter so much? And yet, think of times when you've seen it yourself. A colleague at work, serious as ever, walks into a meeting with a coffee stain on their shirt, or someone giving a speech with a tag still dangling from their jacket. We know it means nothing, and yet it sticks in our minds, pulling our focus away from their words. That is what the misbuttoned coat was in 1892 Germany, a small error magnified by a culture of precision. But here's the contrast that makes the story richer. Step away from the classrooms, the factories, the polished avenues of Berlin, and into a Munich beer hall on a Saturday night. The air is thick with smoke and laughter. The oompa of a brass band rises above the din, and on the long wooden tables sit plates piled high with sausages, tangy sauerkraut and pretzels twisted into knots so big they could double as steering wheels. Here, coats are thrown onto benches without care. Mugs of frothy lager spill over the rims, and the only judgment passed is whether you can keep up with the drinking songs. In this warmth, no one cares if your buttons are off. The uneven lines are hidden in laughter, drowned in clinking mugs, forgiven in the glow of camaraderie. Isn't it remarkable? The same country, the same year, yet two different worlds. A train conductor might raise his eyebrow at your coat, but in the beer hall you could show up wearing it inside out and still be welcomed with a cheer. Context reshaped everything. And speaking of Munich, let me share with you a small historical morsel. By 1892, the city had officially adopted the glass beer stein at Oktoberfest, replacing the old stoneware mugs. Imagine the glint of those new glass Maßkrug catching the golden glow of candlelight, the bubbles rising lazily within, a world of tradition adjusting to change, as if even the beer mugs had decided to button themselves up a little more neatly. And yet, in that very same hall, men laughed at crooked buttons and clapped each other on the back. Contradiction was everywhere. Let's pause here and savour the sensory details, the bitter tang of hops on your tongue, the warmth of the mug between your palms, the crunch of pretzel salt, the chew of sausage rich with spice. A misbuttoned coat in this world is just another quirk, like a pretzel twisted a little unevenly. It fills the stomach just the same. Doesn't it make you smile how some mistakes matter greatly in one place, not at all in another? And so, as the night winds down, and the last of the songs echo into the rafters, picture yourself stepping back into the cold street. You pull on your coat, tired hands fumbling with the buttons, perhaps mismatching them in your drowsiness. In the warm afterglow of laughter and lager, do you even care? Perhaps not. The night forgives you. The city forgives you. For a moment you're free from the gaze of order, carried only by the hum of memory and the rhythm of your own steps. And yet, as dawn comes, the train whistle will blow, the factories will stir awake, and once again the world will expect its citizens to fall in line. The buttons, neat and precise, will be fastened with care, and missteps will once more be noticed. That is the delicate dance of life in 1892 Germany, a society balanced between rigidity and release, precision and play. So let your thoughts rest on that paradox as you breathe a little slower now. Think of the train rocking gently on its rails, the classroom thick with chalk dust, the beer hall roaring with laughter, the uneven pretzel knots, the shimmering glass mugs. All of them part of the same story, all of them bound together by the simple act of fastening a coat. And as we step softly out of Germany's wintry streets, let your mind wander toward another land, another flavour, another place where even the smallest detail might become a story of its own. Imagine now that we step away from the orderly rails of Germany, where buttons had to match the rhythm of the clock, and journey southward into Italy in 1892. The air grows warmer, softer. The clatter of trains and the stern creak of classrooms are replaced with the gentle strum of mandolins in the piazza, and the scent of roasted chestnuts mingles with fresh bread from the bakery. The cobblestones are uneven, the laundry lines sag gently across narrow streets, and above it all, church bells toll the hours with a kind of forgiving laziness. In Italy, the misbuttoned coat carried a different flavour. Not scandalous, not entirely dismissed either. Somewhere in between, like a pasta sauce made just a little too salty but still delicious. Italians valued appearance, of course. To stroll along the Corso in Rome or Milan meant presenting yourself to the world, each detail attended to. But there was also warmth, a shrug, a gesture with the hands that seemed to say, "It happens, life is messy, eat first, worry later." Picture a young man named Carlo, fresh from his apprenticeship, walking across the square in Florence. His coat is buttoned one notch too high, pulling the fabric so it puckers at his chest. An older woman selling figs at her stall notices and tuts softly, shaking her head with affection rather than judgment. "Ragazzo distratto," she mutters. "Distracted boy." Her scolding is gentle, softened by a smile. Isn't that such a contrast to the raised brows of Berlin? The misbutton in Italy was less a crime and more a quirk, something noticed but wrapped in humour and humanity. Let me take you into a cafe on a Roman street corner. The espresso machine hisses like an impatient cat. The small cups clink softly on saucers, and the smell, the smell is thick and dark, as though the entire city could run on caffeine alone. Men gather at the bar, their voices rising and falling with animated debate. A coat, slightly crooked at the buttons, barely registers. Why? Because here, the conversation mattered more than the clothing. Ideas carried more weight than threads. It was in such cafes that political plans, poems and romances all brewed alongside the coffee. Still, there were occasions where the coat mattered. In the grand opera houses, La Scala in Milan, Teatro di San Carlo in Naples, where chandeliers glittered and gowns shimmered like spilled starlight, appearance was part of the performance. A misbuttoned coat there would be as out of place as singing off-key. Imagine arriving at the opera, the murmur of the audience like waves against the shore, and as you hand your coat to the attendant, you notice the uneven line of buttons. In that glittering hall, it would feel like a spotlight cast on a small imperfection. You would tug at it quickly, hoping no one else noticed. And perhaps they did not, but you felt it, and that was enough. Isn't that the curious thing? That so often the weight of a mistake lies not in the eyes of others, but in our own awareness. The misbutton becomes a stone we carry in our pocket, pressing against us with every step, even when no one else sees it. Italy in 1892 was a land still stitching itself together. Only a few decades had passed since unification, and the country was a patchwork of dialects, traditions, and regional pride. In such a patchwork, perhaps it made sense that a crooked line of buttons was tolerated. Life itself felt misbuttoned, disjointed but still beautiful. A Sicilian fisherman might care nothing for the coat of a Tuscan banker. A Venetian gondolier, singing softly under the bridges, was more concerned with the rhythm of his oar than the straightness of his jacket. The coat's alignment was just one note in a much larger song. Let me draw you into a dinner table, candlelit, heavy with food. A basket of bread, its crust crackling as it's torn apart. A dish of olives, glossy and bitter. A plate of pasta tossed with tomato and garlic, the sauce staining the lips red. Around the table, family chatter rises and falls. Hands gesture wildly. Wine is poured freely. A misbuttoned coat here, forgotten as soon as it is unfastened and hung on the chair. The meal forgives all. The laughter forgives all. The warmth of family drowns out every small imperfection. And isn't that a lesson worth savouring? That sometimes we are more loved in our imperfection than in our neatness. That the crooked button may even become endearing, a reminder of our humanity. But let's not lose the thread of humour. Italian satirical magazines of the 1890s sometimes poked fun at fashion mishaps. One cartoon I came across once showed a man so flustered with his misbuttoned coat that he ended up fastening his trousers into it, waddling down the street like a penguin. Exaggerated, of course, but the joke landed because everyone knew the tiny sting of that mistake. Even in laughter, the truth of recognition rests. So as the night falls in Italy and the bells toll softly across the rooftops, imagine yourself standing on a balcony. The air is cool, carrying the scent of lemon blossoms from the countryside, the hush of waves from a distant coast. You look down at your coat and notice the buttons slightly misaligned, and instead of shame, you feel a smile. Because here, in this place, the imperfection is part of the music. The crookedness is part of the charm, and as you breathe deeply, letting the night air fill your lungs, remember this: a misbuttoned coat is not always a crime. Sometimes it is a story, a joke, a quirk, a thread that binds us not to rules but to each other. And with that thought, let us leave Italy behind for now. The laughter of the piazza fades. The scent of espresso lingers like a dream, and your footsteps carry you toward the next land, the next table, the next curious moment in the long tale of how something so small could matter so much. Now we wander further west, across the Alps and into France of 1892. Ah, France, land of lace gloves, curling moustaches, and pastries so delicate they might shatter beneath a sigh. Paris in particular carried an elegance like no other, and the button, neat or crooked, was no small matter. Here, a coat was not just clothing, it was a statement, a poem, a piece of theatre stitched in wool and silk. Picture yourself strolling down the Boulevard Haussmann as dusk falls. The gas lamps flicker awake, casting their golden glow on polished shop windows. The air smells faintly of roasted chestnuts sold by street vendors, mingled with the sharper tang of horse manure from carriages clattering past. Women with parasols tucked under their arms glide across the sidewalks, in gowns with perfect seams. Men in bowler hats tip them politely, coats buttoned high against the evening chill. Now imagine one such man, in a hurry, fastening his coat wrong, just one button off. The line of fabric tilts like a crooked smile. It's a small thing, but in Paris small things mattered. And yet, Paris had a knack for forgiving flaws when they carried a certain flair. A poet misbuttoning his coat might be seen as eccentric, even fashionable. A painter arriving at Montmartre with his jacket slightly askew might earn a wink rather than a frown. Here, imperfection could be romantic. Isn't that funny? In Berlin it was sloppy. In Florence, forgivable. But in Paris, it was a kind of rebellion dressed as carelessness. Let me take you inside one of those Montmartre cafes. The tables wobble slightly, the candles flicker in their glass chimneys, and the air is thick with smoke. Pipe smoke, cigarette smoke, the heady smell of absinthe. Painters argue over colours, writers scratch lines of poetry into notebooks, and a violin wails softly in the corner. Coats hang crookedly on the backs of chairs, some buttoned properly, others carelessly left half done. Who cared? Here the misbutton was not a social crime. It was almost an accessory, like ordering absinthe when everyone else chose wine. It made you different, noticeable. But step across town, into the glitter of the Paris Opera House, and the story changes. Crystal chandeliers hang like galaxies overhead. The velvet seats gleam under the light, and the audience rustles in anticipation as the orchestra tunes. Here, a misbutton was out of tune with the entire room. Just as a single false violin note would pierce the symphony, so would a crooked coat stand out in this palace of elegance. Imagine a gentleman realizing too late that his coat is wrong as he bows to a lady in silk gloves. He feels the flush of embarrassment, the tightening at his collar, as if every crystal above is a pair of eyes fixed on his mistake. Isn't it strange how one's surroundings magnify a small error? The same coat, the same buttons, and yet in one cafe it's charming. In the opera it's humiliating. It makes me think of something we all know. The context of our flaws often matters more than the flaws themselves. A mismatched sock at home is a laugh. In a wedding photo it feels like a disaster. France also had a delicious sense of humour about such things. Satirical papers often printed little sketches of dandies so obsessed with their appearance that they couldn't even button a coat properly. The cartoons exaggerated their narrow waists, their absurdly tall hats, their monocles gleaming as they fumbled with buttons. Readers chuckled because they knew the truth. No matter how refined, no one was immune to the tiny mistakes of life. Now, allow me to paint you another scene. Imagine a bakery just before dawn. The ovens roar with heat. Golden loaves of baguette are drawn out with long paddles, their crusts crackling, the smell filling the street. A baker, apron dusted white with flour, wipes his brow and pulls his coat on against the chill morning air. In his tiredness, he misbuttons it, the line crooked across his chest. Does anyone care? The customers will only notice the bread, still steaming as they tear it open. The misbuttoned coat becomes part of the charm, a symbol of honest labour. The bread forgives the man, and the people forgive him too. That, I think, is the French paradox of 1892. Perfection demanded in some places, indulgence in others. A land that could scoff at crooked buttons in the opera, yet smile at them in the bakery. It is not unlike their cuisine, is it? A feast of rules and refinements at the formal table, but joyfully rustic in the village kitchen. A misbuttoned coat was simply another layer of that duality. Let's savour a sensory moment now. Picture yourself biting into a fresh croissant still warm. The outer crust shatters with a crisp crackle, flakes falling to your lap, while the inside is soft, buttery, yielding. It is perfection, and yet it is messy. A neat row of buttons disrupted, a croissant scattering crumbs. It is the same lesson, really. Life's best moments are often imperfect. And so, as the Parisian night winds on, as absinthe glasses empty and chandeliers dim, think of those crooked coats hanging on cafe chairs. Think of the baker's flour-dusted jacket. Think of the stiff opera-goer adjusting his collar with burning cheeks. All of them telling the same quiet truth, that even in the most elegant city of the 19th century, imperfection slipped in, and sometimes it even stole the show. And now, as we leave the boulevards behind, let your mind drift onward. Another land, another flavour, another place where the simple act of fastening a coat could ripple into a story worth whispering about. Close your eyes and picture the great avenues of St. Petersburg in 1892. The Neva River lies frozen in sheets of pale silver. Sleigh bells jingle faintly in the distance, and the air is so cold it feels like glass against your skin. Fur hats bob along the street, boots crunch on snow, and coats. Our coats here were not just garments, but fortresses. Heavy wool, lined with fur, trimmed with brass buttons that gleamed like tiny suns against the dark fabric. In this northern kingdom, misbuttoning your coat was no light matter. It wasn't just a question of appearance. It could mean real discomfort in the merciless Russian winter. Imagine a young clerk hurrying across Palace Square, his breath fogging in front of him. He's late for work in a government office, where ledgers stack high and ink stains the fingertips. In his rush, his numb fingers slip and he misbuttons his coat. The fabric pulls crookedly, leaving a gap that the wind bites through without mercy. By the time he reaches the doors, his chest stings with cold, and his colleagues glance at him, noting the disorder. Here, misbuttoning wasn't only sloppy, it was impractical, almost foolish. In a climate where survival itself depended on order, even your buttons had to obey. But let us not make Russia sound too stern. There were moments of warmth as well. Step with me into a dacha, a country home where the samovar hisses on the table, pouring endless cups of steaming tea. The air smells of black bread and honey, the wood stove crackles, and laughter fills the room. A farmer enters, his coat crookedly buttoned after a day in the fields. The family chuckles, not cruelly but fondly, teasing him for his haste. Here, within the circle of firelight, the crooked button became a symbol of labour, of honest tiredness. No shame, just humanity. Isn't it striking how the same detail changes meaning depending on the walls around it? In the icy streets, it was folly. In the dacha, it was forgiven. And let's not forget Russia's love of theatre. In the glittering halls of St. Petersburg, where chandeliers cascaded light upon velvet curtains and gilt balconies, appearance mattered deeply. A misbuttoned coat on the way into the Maria Yinsky Theatre could mark you as careless, as someone unfit for the elegance of the evening. Imagine the hush of the audience before Tchaikovsky's music begins, every eye sharp with expectation. To sit there with a crooked coat would feel like a false note in a piano sonata. You would fix it quickly, heart racing, praying the dim light had hidden your mistake. Let me share a taste of history here. In 1892, Russia was still reeling from the changes brought by Tsar Alexander III. The empire valued strength, discipline, and tradition. The misbuttoned coat in such a culture symbolized disorder, a thing to be corrected. Yet, as always, humor found its way in. Russian folk tales were filled with bumbling characters, peasants who stumbled, misbuttoned, misplaced, and yet somehow won the day through luck or kindness. Perhaps that is why, even as the aristocracy sneered, the common people laughed. Now, let's pause and savor a Russian table. Imagine biting into a pirozhki, little hand pies filled with meat or cabbage, their crust golden and warm. You hold it in mittened hands as snow swirls outside. The pastry flakes steam escapes, and for a moment the cold world is held at bay. A misbuttoned coat here, forgotten as the food fills you with warmth. Isn't it comforting how food forgives what fashion condemns? And yet, even in Russia, some chose to play with the rules. Students in Moscow, much like their counterparts in Oxford or Paris, sometimes deliberately wore their coats crooked. A tiny rebellion, a way of saying, we are not machines, we are alive. Imagine them laughing in the corridors of a university, snow on their boots, ink on their fingers, coats slightly askew. Their misbutton was not a failure, but a declaration. As night falls on St. Petersburg, the river glows under moonlight, and sleighs slide across the snow like shadows. You pull your coat tighter, making sure the buttons are even this time, though perhaps one slips again. Does it matter? The stars above do not care. The cold wind does not care. Only we humans assign weight to such small things, and perhaps that is what makes them worth remembering. So breathe deeply now. Imagine that frosty air filling your lungs, the warmth of the samovar waiting for you inside, and let the crooked buttons fade into softness. For in Russia of 1892, as in every land, imperfection walked quietly beside perfection, and life was never fully neat nor fully undone. And with that, let us leave the snow behind and drift onward to another place, another table, another story where coats and buttons held their curious power. Imagine the bustling streets of New York City in 1892. The harbour smells of salt and steam as ships unload their cargo, and the air hums with the noise of an ever-growing city. Horses clatter along cobblestones. Street vendors call out their wares, and above it all the new skyscrapers claw toward the sky, symbols of a restless age. Here, in America, the misbuttoned coat was seen through yet another lens. Less a scandal, less a charm, more a sign of speed, a world moving too fast to pause for tiny corrections. A man rushing to catch the elevated railway, coat slightly askew, was not mocked so much as pitied. People might nod, thinking, busy fellow. The crooked buttons became an emblem of hustle, of lives lived in motion. Picture yourself walking down Broadway. The air is filled with the aroma of roasted peanuts sold from a street cart, sweet and salty at once. A man in a bowler hat, coat crooked, weaves through the crowd, clutching a newspaper still damp from the press. Headlines scream of politics, industry, invention. Who has time to worry about buttons when the very century itself seems to be misbuttoned, rushing forward unevenly, skipping steps, but determined to move on? And yet, in the parlours of Fifth Avenue, where the wealthy elite gathered beneath chandeliers and velvet drapes, appearances mattered still. A crooked coat there might mark you as uncouth, unfit for society's gaze. Imagine entering such a parlour, greeted by the scent of cigar smoke and the soft rustle of silk dresses. Your misaligned buttons would stand out as if you'd arrived with mud on your boots. Context, as always, shifted the meaning. But the heart of America lay in its mix, its patchwork of people. Immigrants poured through Ellis Island, their coats worn thin from long journeys. Who could worry about misbuttoning when survival itself was at stake? A crooked coat on a tired mother carrying her child ashore spoke not of sloppiness, but of courage. The buttons became less about fashion, more about endurance. Let's linger for a moment at a diner, one of those early bustling places with counters lined in stools, the hiss of bacon on a griddle and the sharp smell of fresh coffee. A man shrugs off his coat, crookedly buttoned from his dash across town, and no one notices. Everyone is too busy with their own breakfasts, stacks of flapjacks dripping with syrup, eggs sizzling, pie slices waiting under glass domes. Here the coat is forgotten. Food takes precedence. Isn't it always that way in America, where comfort on the plate forgives almost anything else? And think of this. 1892 was the year Ellis Island first opened its doors. Millions would pass through over the decades, their coats buttoned or misbuttoned, carrying their hopes across oceans. For them, the button was not a symbol of style, but of story, evidence of a journey, a mark of survival, a piece of home stitched to their chest. Humour existed too, of course. Newspaper cartoons poked fun at politicians with coats askew, suggesting that crooked buttons meant crooked morals. One famous sketch showed a senator so tangled in his coat that he couldn't find his own pockets, fumbling as voters laughed. Isn't it funny how satire always finds its way into the smallest details? Now, pause with me in Central Park. Snow dusts the paths, children skate clumsily on the frozen pond, and the lamps glow softly in the twilight. You walk along, your coat slightly misaligned, and no one seems to mind. The city, enormous and alive, swallows small mistakes into its vastness. Perhaps that is America's gift, the ability to absorb imperfections into its noisy, sprawling rhythm. And so, as the night deepens over New York, with ferries gliding like shadows across the Hudson and trains rattling through the dark, imagine yourself standing on a street corner. You tug your coat, notice the buttons slightly off, and smile. In this city, that crookedness is simply another stitch in the grand quilt. It belongs just as you do. And with that, let us turn away from the bustle of America's streets and wander toward another shore, another tale, another way the humble coat whispered its quiet influence through history. Now imagine the crowded streets of Tokyo in 1892. Lanterns swing gently above the shop fronts, their paper glowing amber against the evening sky. The air smells of grilled fish, soy sauce, and the faint tang of burning charcoal. Wooden getter sandals clatter on the narrow streets, and merchants call out from stalls laden with rice cakes, sweets, and steaming bowls of noodles. Japan was in the midst of transformation then, the Meiji era, when old and new coexisted uneasily. Kimonos brushed shoulders with Western suits, top knots gave way to bowler hats, and etiquette wavered between centuries-old rituals and the sharp newness of modern life. And what of the misbuttoned coat? Ah, it sat right in the middle of that tension. For those who embraced Western clothing, a coat was more than warmth. It was a symbol of progress, of modern identity. A crooked button, then, could suggest not only carelessness, but also clumsiness with this imported fashion. Imagine a young clerk in a government office, eager to prove himself, fastening his European-style coat wrong. His colleagues might chuckle quietly, whispering that he looked like a child playing dress-up. The misbutton, in this setting, marked you as not yet fully competent in the new ways. But step into a tea house, where tatami mats soften the floor and the air is perfumed with green tea and sweet mochi, and the coat, Western or not, is left at the door. There, only your manners matter, the angle of your bow, the grace of your movements. A misbutton vanishes into the shadows, forgotten as the steam curls upward from the teacup. Isn't it soothing how certain spaces wash away the weight of small mistakes? And yet, humour found its place here too. In satirical woodblock prints, foreign diplomats were sometimes drawn with coats buttoned all wrong, exaggerating their awkwardness. The crooked button became a symbol of cultural fumbling, a way to laugh at outsiders who struggle to understand the dance of Japanese etiquette. Let's slow down and savour the sensory details. Picture yourself walking through a market at dusk. Lanterns bob gently in the breeze, the chatter of merchants rises and falls, and you taste the sweet stickiness of dango, skewered rice dumplings glazed with soy. The warmth of the treat lingers on your tongue, the night air cool on your cheeks. A man passes you, his western coat crookedly buttoned, and no one even looks twice. In the bustle of the market, perfection dissolves into the crowd. But in the imperial court, appearances still mattered. A misbuttoned coat in a formal gathering could bring shame, not only to the individual but to the family they represented. In such a setting, every detail was a statement of discipline, honor, and respect. Imagine standing in the hush of a grand reception hall, the floor polished to a mirror sheen, the silence heavy as dignitaries bow. A crooked line of buttons would burn like a lantern in the dark. Still, the lesson of Japan in 1892 is this: context defines meaning. On the street, a misbutton was invisible. In the tea house, irrelevant. In the government office, embarrassing. In the palace, dishonorable. One gesture, one small slip refracted through many lenses. And perhaps that is why the story of the misbuttoned coat feels so universal. Because haven't we all known those moments? At home, the small mistake doesn't matter. In front of friends, it may be funny. But in the wrong room, at the wrong time, it feels enormous. It is never the button itself. It is always the weight we attach to it. As the lanterns in Tokyo's streets fade into the night and the cicadas hum softly in the trees, imagine yourself walking back to your lodging. Your coat is slightly off, but you leave it that way, smiling to yourself. In this city, in this moment, it feels less like a flaw and more like a reminder. Life itself is always slightly misbuttoned, always a little uneven, and perhaps that is what makes it worth living. And so, with a bow of farewell to Japan's glowing streets, let us turn to yet another place, another culture, another way a coat could speak volumes without a single word. Picture the wide, sunlit plazas of Madrid in 1892. The air is dry and warm, scented faintly with dust and oranges from vendors' carts. Horse-drawn carriages rattle over cobblestones, their wheels clicking like castanets. Street performers strum guitars under the shade of olive trees, and the murmur of conversation floats like music through the air. In Spain, coats were less about rigid propriety and more about presence, about how one carried themselves, about confidence and poise. A misbuttoned coat here did not always provoke scandal. Sometimes it was met with a shrug, or even with admiration, depending on who wore it. After all, Spain had long admired a touch of drama in its style. A crooked button on the right man could look like a flourish, a deliberate note of individuality. Imagine a young matador stepping out of the arena gates after a fight. His coat, hastily thrown on, is unevenly fastened, but no one laughs. Instead, it looks as though his very clothing bears the marks of his daring. The crooked buttons whisper of passion, of action, of life lived in motion. Isn't it curious how, in some cultures, imperfection doesn't weaken an image, it strengthens it? Now step with me into a small tavern in Seville. The air is thick with the smell of roasted garlic and saffron, with sizzling pans of paella carried to wooden tables. Laughter rolls as freely as the wine, and a guitarist plucks out a tune in the corner. A farmer enters, his coat crookedly buttoned after a long day. The room notices, yes, but only to joke warmly. Someone raises a glass, teasing him, and the farmer grins, accepting the laughter as easily as he accepts his food. Here, the crooked coat is no mark of shame. It's part of the shared humour of daily life. But in the courts of Madrid, in salons where chandeliers glittered and politicians debated under painted ceilings, appearance was stricter. A misbutton there could be dangerous, suggesting carelessness, even disrespect. Imagine bowing before a minister with your coat uneven. The glance, the pause, the silence would say more than words. Once again, the setting transformed the meaning. Let's pause to taste the food of this land. Imagine the crisp snap of churros dipped into thick, rich chocolate. The sugar clings to your fingertips, the warmth fills your mouth, and for a moment, nothing else matters. A crooked coat in the sweetness of that bite is forgotten. It is hard to care about fashion when chocolate melts on your tongue. And Spain, too, had its humour. Satirical plays of the 19th century often poked fun at fussy officials who obsessed over appearances but bungled their words or tripped over their own robes. The audience laughed, reminded that even those in power could stumble. A misbuttoned coat, then, became a symbol not of shame but of satire. Think now of the streets at night, when lanterns glow softly and the air cools at last. The sound of distant flamenco, heels striking wood, voices rising in song carries across the rooftops. You walk home, your coat slightly crooked, but in this rhythm, in this music, no one minds. Spain forgives the flaw, even celebrates it, because life itself is meant to be lived with passion, not perfection. And so, as we leave the plazas behind, let your mind wander toward the next land, the next flavour, the next way a humble row of buttons could stir whispers, laughter, or admiration. Now picture the great streets of London once again, but not the polished city centre of high society. This time, imagine the East End in 1892. The fog drapes itself thickly over narrow lanes, lanterns glow dim behind the haze, and the smell of coal smoke mixes with fried fish sold from paper parcels. Children dart between carts, laughter echoing through alleys, and the hum of the city is punctuated by the clip-clop of horses hauling their loads. In these poorer quarters, a misbuttoned coat was not unusual. Clothes were often second-hand, patched and repatched until fabric gave way entirely. A crooked line of buttons might not even be noticed. Survival mattered more than style. To have a coat at all was a sign of fortune compared to many who braved the chill with nothing more than threadbare shawls. A misbutton here was no crime. It was simply life. Yet contrast this with Mayfair, where the wealthy dined in candlelit rooms while violins played softly in the corner. There, every stitch mattered. A gentleman with a crooked button might be seen as careless, even disrespectful to his host. The coat in that world was not merely clothing, it was armour of status. To misbutton it was to crack the shell, to let the world glimpse disorder where only perfection was expected. Let me take you now into a small tavern along the Thames. The floorboards creak, the air is damp with river mist, and mugs of ale leave rings on the wooden tables. A sailor lumbers in, his coat fastened all wrong after a night at sea. The room erupts in laughter, not unkind, but hearty, shared. Someone claps him on the back, another offers him bread. Here, a misbutton isn't shame, it's a story, something to laugh about together. Isn't it always so that flaws turn into entertainment in the right company? Pause with me for a sensory moment. Imagine biting into a warm meat pie, flaky crust giving way to steaming gravy inside. The taste is rich, savoury, comforting. A crooked coat in that moment? Forgotten. Food always has a way of quieting judgment, doesn't it? In 1892, London was a city of sharp contrasts. The East End and the West End, poverty and wealth, grime and glitter lived side by side. The misbuttoned coat symbolised that contrast. In one street, invisible. In another, intolerable. It was as though the city itself was misbuttoned, its halves uneven, its seams pulling against one another. Humour found its way here too. Punch magazine, with its cartoons and satire, loved poking fun at small social mishaps. A crooked coat was sometimes drawn as a metaphor for crooked politics, for leaders who couldn't align their own garments, let alone the empire. People laughed because it was safe to laugh at buttons, even when the joke carried sharper edges. And as night deepened, the fog thickened over the Thames, muffling the sound of oars and distant bells. You might walk along the embankment, coat slightly askew, hands tucked deep into your pockets. Does anyone notice? Perhaps. But in the quiet, in the mist, even the city itself seems softened, forgiving the little flaws of those who walk its streets. So breathe deeply now, the damp air cool against your skin, and remember this. Even in the heart of an empire obsessed with order and hierarchy, the crooked button told a gentler truth, that beneath the layers of silk and soot, every Londoner was just a person fumbling with their coat in the dark. And as we leave the fog behind, let your mind wander onward, to another place, another people, another story stitched into the seams of history. Now picture yourself stepping into the grand boulevards of Vienna in 1892. The air carries the faint sweetness of pastries drifting from coffee houses, mixed with the metallic clatter of carriage wheels striking cobblestones. The city hums with music. Waltzes spill from open windows, violins are tuned in dimly lit chambers, and the great halls echo with rehearsals of Strauss and Brahms. Vienna was a city of elegance, and appearances mattered here as much as notes in a symphony. A misbuttoned coat was like a piano played out of tune. It jarred against the harmony that the city so carefully composed. Imagine a gentleman arriving at the opera house, chandeliers sparkling above, his coat buttoned askew. The ushers might not say a word, but the silence of others, the sideways glance, would carry its weight. In a city where beauty was prized, disorder, even a small one, was a discordant note. Yet, there was also warmth. Step with me into a Viennese coffee house. The ceilings soar high, the walls glow with a golden light, and the tables are scattered with newspapers, each resting on their wooden frames. The air smells of rich coffee, dark and velvety, served in porcelain cups with a silver spoon and a cube of sugar on the side. Men and women linger for hours, debating philosophy, sketching ideas, whispering poetry. A crooked coat here? Barely noticed. The intellect, the conversation, the art, these mattered more than the straightness of a seam. Pause a moment and savour the taste. Picture yourself lifting a forkful of sachertorte, the chocolate dense and glossy, the layer of apricot jam cutting sweet richness with tart brightness. The cake melts on your tongue, and for a moment every worry softens. Isn't it remarkable how food turns even the sternest details into background noise? A misbuttoned coat dissolves in the sweetness of chocolate. But in the grand salons where chandeliers glittered and ballrooms swept wide beneath painted ceilings, every stitch mattered once again. Picture a waltz beginning, couples gliding across polished floors, skirts swirling like blossoms in the air. A misbuttoned coat here could ruin symmetry, a crooked line standing out in the swirl of perfection. It wasn't just clothing, it was choreography. To wear a crooked coat was to dance slightly offbeat, a flaw no one could ignore. Vienna loved its humour too. Satirical plays and operettas often mocked the stiff rules of fashion and society. On stage, a bumbling character might misbutton his coat and stumble into a ballroom, drawing laughter from the crowd. The joke worked because the audience understood the weight of the error. They laughed at the character but also at themselves, at their own obsession with order. And think now of Vienna's students, gathered in taverns after long lectures, coats thrown haphazardly over chairs, buttons crooked, collars loose. They laughed, sang, toasted with steins of beer, and dreamed of futures filled with ideas. In those smoky rooms, the crooked coat became a symbol of freedom, a rejection of the stiff elegance of the ballroom. Isn't it interesting how youth always finds a way to turn mistake into rebellion? As night deepens over Vienna, the city softens. The waltzes fade, the coffee houses dim, and the carriages rattle away into the quiet. You walk along the Ringstrasse, your coat crooked, the air cool and sweet. The moon glimmers on the Danube and you realise, in this city as in all others, imperfection and perfection dance together, one never far from the other. So breathe with me, slowly, gently. Hear the last strains of music echo in the distance. Smell the fading sweetness of pastries in the night air. And let the crooked buttons of Vienna remind you, harmony is never perfect. It always has its small human notes. And with that, let us step softly away from Austria's golden halls and drift toward another land, another taste, another crooked coat waiting to tell its story. Now, imagine the streets of Istanbul in 1892, the meeting point of East and West, where minarets pierced the sky and the Bosporus shimmered with light. The air carried the spice of roasted lamb from street vendors, the sweetness of baklava cooling in bakery windows, and the salt tang of the sea drifting in on the breeze. The call to prayer rose and fell through the city like a tide, weaving itself into daily life. Here, the misbuttoned coat had its own peculiar place. The Ottoman Empire was modernizing, drawing in threads of European fashion, while holding firmly to its own traditions. In the bazaars, where fabric spilled in waves of colour, silks, velvets, embroidered sashes, a crooked button on a western coat might have drawn a merchant's amused glance. After all, why struggle with foreign fastenings when a kaftan, flowing and graceful, carried its own elegance without a single button to fumble? Picture yourself in the grand bazaar. The air is heavy with spice, cinnamon, cardamom, cloves, each stall glowing under lamplight. Merchants call out, bargaining with cheerful insistence. A man passes in a European-style coat buttoned wrong, and the vendor chuckles softly, shaking his head. The mistake is not scandalous here. It is simply another sign of the strange mix of worlds colliding. East meeting West, tradition meeting modernity, kaftans brushing shoulders with frock coats. Now step with me into a Turkish coffee house. The air swirls with the sweet smoke of water pipes. The thick scent of cardamom-laced coffee rises from tiny cups, and backgammon pieces click softly across wooden boards. Men lean in close, whispering politics, poetry, stories. A crooked button on a coat, invisible in the haze of conversation. Here, words mattered more than stitches. Ideas carried more weight than fabric. Pause, and let's taste the moment. Picture lifting a small ornate cup of Turkish coffee. The liquid is dark, almost black, with a fine layer of foam on top. It's bitter, rich, almost syrupy, and at the bottom, a dusting of grounds waits like fortune-telling shadows. One sip warms you through, stronger than wine, stronger than tea. A crooked button in this moment, forgotten, washed away in the strength of flavour. But in the palaces along the Bosporus, where sultans held court beneath gilded ceilings, where ambassadors bowed and glittering chandeliers cast endless light, the button mattered again. A misaligned coat there suggested disrespect, an unfitness for the grandeur of the setting. Imagine standing before the Sultan's representatives, your coat askew. Your mistake would be small, yes, but magnified by the brilliance around you. The crookedness would be read as clumsiness, as though you could not manage your own appearance, let alone represent your people. And yet, outside those walls, the ordinary people of Istanbul laughed at such worries. In the neighbourhoods where children played in narrow lanes, where bread baked in communal ovens and cats prowled lazily on rooftops, a crooked coat was just another detail in the tapestry of daily life. Life itself was not neatly buttoned. It spilled, it tangled, it surprised. Humour too found its place. Street storytellers, meddahs, often slipped such details into their tales. A foolish character might enter with his coat askew, his buttons tangled, earning laughter from the crowd before the story even began. The misbutton became a symbol of folly, of human clumsiness, of the small flaws that make us laugh because they are so familiar. As night falls over Istanbul, the city glows with lanterns reflecting on the water. The calls of merchants fade, replaced by the soft splash of oars as boats cross the strait. You walk along the shoreline, the cool night air brushing your face. Your coat is crookedly buttoned, but no one notices. The stars glitter above, the water shimmers below, and in that vastness your small imperfection feels almost holy, a reminder that human life is always slightly uneven, stitched with flaws, and yet endlessly beautiful. So breathe deeply, smell the spices still lingering in the air, hear the faint strains of music rising from a tavern, and let the crooked buttons of Istanbul remind you, perfection is not the goal. Harmony, warmth, and humanity, these are what endure. And with that, let us leave the Bosporus behind, stepping gently onto another shore, where coats and crooked lines will carry yet another meaning. Now picture the streets of Cairo in 1892, where the desert sun burned golden against stone buildings, and the Nile shimmered with slow, endless movement. The air was alive with dust and spice, cumin and coriander from street stalls, the faint sweetness of dates, and the earthy smell of bread baking in clay ovens. Donkeys brayed in the distance, vendors called out their wares, and the city hummed with a rhythm older than memory. Here the misbuttoned coat was not so much a scandal as it was a curiosity. Western-style coats were becoming more common in Egypt at the time, especially among officials and those who worked with European traders. But for most, the traditional galabeya, a long, flowing robe, remained the norm, and so the very idea of buttoning wrong seemed slightly foreign, even amusing. Imagine a merchant in a western jacket standing beside a neighbour in his robe, the crooked line of buttons noticed but shrugged off with a laugh. Why fuss with these little fasteners, someone might say, when cloth can simply flow? Step with me into a coffee house along a shaded street. The air swirls with smoke from shisha pipes, flavoured faintly with apple or mint. Small cups of coffee, thick and dark, are served on brass trays, and the sound of dice rattling in a backgammon game punctuates the conversation. A crooked coat here. It melts into the smoke, forgotten as stories stretch late into the night. Men lean in, speaking softly of politics, poetry, family, while cats curl in corners and ceiling fans whir slowly overhead. Pause and taste this moment. Picture yourself tearing into a piece of warm flatbread, dipping it into a dish of spiced lentils. The bread is chewy, smoky from the oven, the lentils rich with garlic and cumin. Crooked button in this meal? Invisible. Food forgives always. But in the more formal spaces, government buildings, foreign offices, gatherings of the elite, the coat's neatness mattered. Egypt in 1892 was under strong British influence, and the European standards of appearance pressed heavily. A misbuttoned coat in those settings was not just sloppy, it could be read as a lack of seriousness, a sign that you did not quite belong in the polished, borrowed world of Western etiquette. Imagine a clerk, proud to have risen to his position, realizing too late that his coat is uneven as he hands papers to a British official. His pride trembles, though the mistake is small. Isn't it always the case that in rooms of power, tiny details grow heavy? Yet among ordinary people, humour softened everything. Street performers and storytellers, the Hakawatis, loved to poke fun at figures of authority. One might act out a pompous official striding about with his coat askew, making a fool of himself as the crowd laughed. The crooked button became a symbol not of shame but of satire, a way to laugh at those who thought themselves above the rest. As evening falls, Cairo transforms. The heat of the day fades into a cool, perfumed night. Lanterns glow in narrow alleys. The river reflects the stars, and voices drift through open windows with songs that stretch into the dark. You walk slowly along the Nile's edge, your coat slightly off, and the breeze touches your skin where the buttons left a gap. Does anyone notice? Perhaps. But in this vast ancient city, the imperfection seems almost insignificant. Another ripple in a river that has carried millions of stories. So breathe deeply now. Smell the spices in the air, hear the dice clatter on the backgammon board, feel the warmth of the bread in your hand. Let the crooked coat of Cairo remind you that not all rules are universal, and that sometimes what looks like error in one place is barely noticed in another. And with that, let us leave the glow of Cairo's lamps behind, drifting on to another land, another coat, another story waiting quietly to be told. Imagine the streets of Delhi in 1892. The sun is lowering in the sky, turning the sandstone walls of old forts into fire, while the scent of jasmine lingers in the warm evening air. Rickshaws creak through narrow lanes, bells jingle faintly from ox carts, and the air hums with a chorus of vendors selling spiced chickpeas, roasted peanuts, and sugar-dusted jalebis still warm from the pan. Here, the misbuttoned coat took on another meaning. India was under British rule at the time, and with it came the influx of Western fashion among officials, clerks, and the elite. The traditional kurta, sherwani, or dhoti had no buttons to fuss over in the same way, cloth-draped, tied, or wrapped, flowing with ease. But a Western coat introduced a new possibility for mistakes, and those mistakes sometimes carried more weight than they should. Picture a young Indian clerk in a colonial office. He wears a suit cut in the European style, his hair oiled and neatly parted, his shoes polished. But in his haste that morning, one button slipped into the wrong hole. The British officer notices and raises an eyebrow. The clerk feels his cheeks flush, because in that room, the coat was not just clothing. It was a performance, a sign of competence in a borrowed world. A crooked button became a whisper of not quite enough. Step outside that office, though, and everything shifts. In the bazaars, where spices piled in pyramids of red, gold, and green, where saris in brilliant colours rippled like waterfalls of silk, where the air was heavy with incense and frying samosas, the crooked coat barely mattered. Merchants laughed at such fussiness. What is one crooked line, they might say, when life itself flows unevenly? Pause with me and taste this moment. Imagine biting into a jalebi, its orange coil sticky with syrup, still hot from the oil. The sugar clings to your fingers, the sweetness almost overwhelming, but softened by the crunch. A misbuttoned coat here? Forgotten entirely. The food takes precedence, as it always does, and yet humour found its way here too. In the tea shops, Men gathered to gossip, sip strong chai, and tell stories. A favourite target was the pompous babu, the clerk who mimicked his colonial masters a little too earnestly. The storyteller might puff up his chest, strut about and pretend to button his coat wrong, drawing laughter from the crowd. The crooked button became a symbol of pretension, of the awkward space between imitation and authenticity. Isn't it curious how such a small mistake could be read in so many ways? In one room, a failure. In another, invisible. In a third, a joke. As evening deepens, the city softens. The lamps are lit, their glow golden against the night. The scent of cardamom drifts from pots of chai simmering on the street. Somewhere a sitar plays, its notes stretching like silk into the darkness. You walk along, your coat slightly off, and no one notices. A breeze touches your skin through the gap, but instead of shame, you feel only relief. The relief of realizing that the world does not watch as closely as we imagine. And that is perhaps the lesson of Delhi in 1892, that what feels like a crime in one corner may dissolve into laughter, or sweetness, or indifference in another. That buttons are never just buttons, they're stories, and those stories shift with the eyes that see them. So breathe deeply now, smell the cardamom and the smoke, hear the murmur of the bazaar, and let the crooked button of Delhi remind you. Imperfection is not a flaw, but a thread woven into the cloth of life itself. And with that, let us step softly away from India's glowing streets and onward, toward another land, another crooked line waiting in the quiet folds of history. Imagine the wide, dusty streets of Mexico City in 1892. The sun is bright and unrelenting by day, casting sharp shadows against adobe walls, and by evening the air cools, filled with the scent of roasted corn and the faint smoke of wood fires. Street vendors call out, selling tamales wrapped in husks, pan dulce stacked high on trays, and cups of chocolate thickened with cinnamon and chili. The city hums with both tradition and change, its heartbeat steady, its rhythms alive. Here, the misbuttoned coat had its own flavour of meaning. For some, especially officials and men of letters who adopted European suits, a crooked button was a small but telling detail. It suggested carelessness, a lack of dignity, perhaps even laziness. After all, the Porfirio Diaz era valued progress, order, and the appearance of modernity. To wear your coat wrong in the presence of power was to show you didn't belong in the performance of refinement. But in the mercados, the bustling markets alive with colour and sound, a misbuttoned coat was invisible. Who cared about the line of a jacket when the air was filled with marigolds, when baskets of chiles gleamed red and green, when voices rose and fell in 100 songs of barter? A crooked coat in the market was like a wrinkle in a tortilla. It meant nothing because the tortilla still fed you. Picture yourself there, walking slowly past stalls. A woman hands you a fresh tortilla, still hot, folded around beans and cheese. The steam fogs the cool air and you take a bite. The beans are rich, the tortilla soft, the cheese melting. In that bite, the world is perfect, no matter how your coat sits on your shoulders. Isn't it always so? Food heals what fashion condemns. Let's step into a cantina now. The wooden doors swing open, and inside the smell of mezcal and lime hangs thick. Guitars strum softly in the corner, a song about love and loss. Men lean across tables, their coats wrinkled, their buttons crooked, their laughter loud. The crooked button here is not shame, but part of the music of the room, part of its looseness. No one comes to a cantina for perfection. They come for relief, for company, for song. Yet, in the halls of government or among the city's elites, every button mattered. Imagine attending a formal dinner, chandeliers glowing above, silverware polished, and a misbuttoned coat noticed as the guests sit. In that moment, it feels like a flaw in the ceremony, like a candle guttering unexpectedly. The wearer might sweat with shame, though the mistake itself is small. Such is the strange weight of detail in formal spaces. Humour softened the sharpness, of course. Popular theatre and street songs often poked fun at pompous officials. A character might strut about, misbuttoned coat flapping, trying to act important but failing, drawing laughter from the crowd. The crooked line became a symbol of pretense undone, of dignity slipping where it least wanted to. And so, Mexico in 1892 revealed yet another truth, that mistakes take their meaning from the company they keep. In the cantina, the misbutton was camaraderie. In the market, it was invisible. In the palace, it was a flaw. One gesture shifting like light across the plaza stones. Pause here with me and savour another taste. Imagine sipping a cup of champurrado, warm chocolate thickened with masa, spiced with cinnamon, sweetened with piloncillo. The drink coats your tongue, rich and comforting. In that sweetness, in that warmth, every crookedness dissolves. The drink forgives you. The night forgives you. As dusk deepens, the city grows quieter. Lanterns glow, the air cools, and the moon casts silver light over the rooftops. You walk slowly home, your coat slightly crooked, and for once you feel no need to fix it. In this place, in this moment, imperfection belongs as much as order does. So breathe deeply now, smell the roasted corn, hear the strum of the guitar, taste the sweetness of chocolate on your lips. Let the crooked coat of Mexico remind you, dignity is not found in straight lines, but in the warmth of being human among others. And with that, let us leave Mexico's lively plazas and drift toward another land, another table, another story of small flaws and the large meanings they carried. Now imagine Buenos Aires in 1892, a city on the rise, where European architecture blended with South American spirit, and tango rhythms were just beginning to stir in dimly lit dance halls. The air was warm with sea breezes from the Rio de la Plata, mixed with the scent of roasted meats turning slowly over coals. Horse-drawn carriages rattled along avenues lined with jacaranda trees, their blossoms scattering purple across the cobblestones. In Argentina, the misbuttoned coat carried both elegance and defiance. For the wealthy elite who styled themselves after Parisian society, every stitch mattered. They wore French suits, silk cravats, polished shoes, and in such circles a crooked button was a mark of failure, a small but visible crack in the performance of refinement. Imagine arriving at the Teatro Colón, chandeliers blazing above, and realizing your coat was misbuttoned. The shame would press as heavily as the eyes of the audience. But outside the glittering halls, on the city's street corners, life had its own rhythm. Step with me into a milonga, where men and women gather to dance tango. The room is smoky, the floor creaks with every step, and the music swells from a bandoneon sighing in the corner. Here, a misbuttoned coat is not a crime, it's part of the story. A man steps forward, jacket uneven, eyes burning with intensity, and when he takes his partner's hand, the coat becomes part of his drama, another crooked note in the music of passion. Pause here and feel the moment. The tango is not about perfection. It is about connection, tension, the push and pull of two bodies in motion. A crooked button does not ruin the dance. It makes it more human. Isn't it always the flaws that make art feel alive? Now let's wander into a parrilla, a bustling grill house where the air is thick with smoke and the savoury scent of asado. Beef ribs, sausages, and flank steaks sizzling over coals. Men sit at long wooden tables, their coats slung over chairs, buttons mismatched, collars loosened. The laughter rises with the smoke, glasses of Malbec clink together, and plates of chimichurri-drenched meat pass from hand to hand. A crooked coat here, forgotten in the joy of eating, but in politics, detail still mattered. Argentina in 1892 was entering a period of reform and unrest. A politician with a misbuttoned coat at a public gathering might be mocked as careless, unworthy of the sharp eyes of the crowd. Newspapers sometimes noted such slips, poking fun at leaders who failed in small ways while promising big things. The crooked button became a metaphor for crooked promises, a symbol of imperfection dressed in power. And yet, humour softened the sting. Street performers, puppeteers, and satirical poets often mocked the pompous elite. A character might appear with his jacket buttoned all wrong, strutting proudly, only to trip over his own shoes. The audience laughed, reminded that even those who claimed perfection were just as clumsy as anyone else. Pause again for taste. Imagine biting into an empanada, its crust flaky, the filling rich with beef, onions, olives, and a hint of spice. The juice runs warm, and you wipe it quickly before it stains. In that bite, every worry softens. Crooked coat. It is nothing compared to the perfection of flavour. As night falls, Buenos Aires glows with lanterns and music. The jacaranda blossoms drift on the breeze. The tango sighs from hidden halls, and laughter spills from open windows. You walk slowly, your coat buttoned wrong, but you do not fix it. The city itself is misbuttoned, caught between Europe and South America, between elegance and passion, between order and freedom. And yet, in that crookedness lies its beauty. So breathe deeply now. Smell the smoke of the asado, hear the rise of the bandoneon, feel the uneven rhythm of the tango beneath your feet. Let the crooked coat of Buenos Aires remind you, life does not ask for perfection, it asks for passion and for presence. And with that, let us step softly away from Argentina's glowing avenues and into another land, another crooked seam stitched into history's long fabric. Picture the streets of St. Petersburg in 1892, glittering under gas lamps while snow drifts down in quiet, silvery sheets. The Neva River lies frozen, carriages roll slowly across bridges, and the air is sharp with winter, every breath turning to mist. Inside grand halls, chandeliers sparkle above ballrooms, and the sound of violins carries across polished floors, where ladies in gowns and men in uniforms move with deliberate grace. Here in Russia, the misbuttoned coat was a subtle but heavy matter. In the cold, a crooked button wasn't only about appearance, it meant a draft creeping in, a chill seeping through fur and wool. Practical discomfort sharpened the shame. For the aristocracy, who lived by rituals of refinement, every line of clothing was a statement of order. A Tsar's officer with his coat wrong? It would be whispered about as loudly as a misplaced beau at court. Imagine a young noble stepping into a winter salon, snow melting from his boots, realizing too late that his greatcoat is uneven. He stands stiffly while others notice. They do not laugh, but their silence weighs heavier than any chuckle. The error, small as it is, becomes a mark of carelessness in a world where appearances meant survival. Step outside that gilded circle, though, and the meaning changes. Walk with me into a tavern by the frozen river. The door creaks open, warmth spills out, and the air smells of cabbage soup, rye bread, and cheap vodka. Inside, peasants huddle by the fire, their coats patched, buttons mismatched, collars worn. A misbutton here, it is no crime at all. Life is crooked enough already, and warmth is worth more than neatness. Pause here and taste the moment. Imagine dipping a hunk of rye bread into hot borscht, steam rising as the beet-red broth clings to your fingers. The sour tang of cabbage, the sweetness of beet, the heat of garlic and dill fill your mouth. The coat may be crooked, but the food is perfect. Isn't it strange how in one place buttons matter more than bread, and in another, bread forgives everything? Now, let us wander into a theatre, where plays poked fun at pompous bureaucrats. A favourite figure of satire was the official, stiff in his European coat, buttoned wrong but acting oblivious. The audience roared with laughter, because everyone recognised the truth. Those who claimed authority were often just as clumsy as the rest. The crooked coat on stage was rebellion disguised as comedy, a way for the powerless to laugh at the powerful. Russia in 1892 was a country divided, and the misbuttoned coat carried that divide. For the aristocracy, it was a flaw in the facade. For the common people, it was simply life, patched, uneven, imperfect, but enduring. A single mistake in a palace might stain a reputation. 1,000 mistakes in a village were just the natural rhythm of survival. Now close your eyes and picture the snow again. Horses stamp their hooves on icy cobblestones, their breath clouding in the air. The bells on their harnesses jingle softly, a lullaby against the hush of winter. You walk home through the drifting flakes, your coat buttoned wrong, the wind slipping through, but you pull it tighter and smile. The imperfection doesn't matter, because the snow is endless, and the world, even in its crookedness, is beautiful. So breathe slowly now. Feel the frost on your cheeks. Hear the violin fading in the distance. Taste the broth still warming your lips. Let the crooked coat of St. Petersburg remind you. Sometimes mistakes are simply part of the season, passing as quickly as snowflakes in the night. And with that, let us leave Russia's frozen streets and step toward another place, another crooked button glowing faintly in the long corridor of history. Imagine Cairo in 1892, a city of golden light and deep shadows, where the desert winds sweep dust across ancient stone and the call to prayer drifts like a lullaby from minarets into the night sky. Lanterns flicker in narrow alleys, the Nile reflects the moon like a sheet of silver, and markets hum with voices, spices, and the clatter of brass vessels. In Egypt, the misbuttoned coat carried yet another layer of meaning. European dress was becoming more common among the educated elite and officials under the influence of colonial powers. A crooked button in this context signaled not just carelessness but a failure to embody modernity. Imagine a young lawyer, freshly educated in Paris, returning to Cairo and attending a gathering. His suit is sharp, his shoes polished, but one button slips astray. The elders notice. Whispers follow. In that instant, he's seen as not yet fully transformed, not yet as precise as the new world demanded. But step outside the drawing rooms, and the picture softens. In the bazaars of Khan el-Khalili, where incense coils in the air and merchants shout their wares, a crooked coat is nothing. Who worries about lines when trays overflow with dates sticky and sweet, when pyramids of spices glow red, yellow and brown, when copper lamps shine like small suns? In the market, the coat is background, the food and the scent and the life are everything. Pause here and imagine tasting a honey-drenched basbousa. The semolina cake is warm, soaked through with syrup, perfumed with rosewater. It melts in your mouth, leaving sweetness that lingers like a gentle hum. In that moment, no one cares about buttons. Sweetness forgives all crookedness. Let's wander into a coffee house. The air is heavy with the smoke of shisha, flavoured with apple and mint. Men sit in wooden chairs, sipping tiny cups of thick, bitter coffee, their coats wrinkled, buttons uneven, collars open. The hum of conversation fills the room, punctuated by laughter, the clack of backgammon pieces, and the faint sound of a ney flute in the distance. A crooked button here is not just acceptable, it belongs. It is part of the looseness of life, part of its rhythm. Yet, in the halls of government, in the schools of law and medicine, in the rooms where Egypt wrestled with the weight of modernity and tradition, every detail counted. A button out of place might be seen as an insult to precision, a small sign of disorder in a time when order was desperately performed. Still, humour softened the tension. Satirical poets and street performers mocked the pretensions of the elite. A character in a play might strut across the stage, his coat crooked, puffing himself up with false dignity, only to be deflated by laughter. The crooked line became a quiet rebellion, a way for ordinary people to remind each other that no suit, no button could hide human clumsiness. Now step outside again into the Cairo night. The air is cooler, the stars blaze bright above the desert, and the Nile carries its eternal current. You walk slowly along the river, your coat buttoned wrong, but you feel the breeze slip in through the gap like a secret. The mistake becomes part of the night, part of its uneven beauty. So breathe deeply now. Smell the rose water and the smoke. Taste the syrup lingering on your tongue. Hear the call to prayer floating like a lullaby across the city. Let the crooked coat of Cairo remind you, order is fragile, but sweetness and laughter endure. And with that, let us leave Egypt's glowing night and drift onward, toward another crooked seam in history's tapestry. Now picture New York City in 1892. The skyline is low compared to the towers it would one day bear, but it already hums with restless energy. Steam rises from manholes, horses clatter along Broadway, and the air is filled with the scent of roasting chestnuts sold from carts. Electric lights are beginning to replace gas lamps, glowing warmly against the winter dusk, while ferries cross the Hudson like fireflies bobbing on water. Here the misbuttoned coat was a curious thing. In the world of Wall Street bankers and industrial magnates, appearances carried weight. A crooked coat button could spark whispers about sloppiness, even weakness. Imagine a financier striding into JP Morgan's office, his waistcoat uneven, his collar askew. The mistake would not be forgiven easily. It spoke of a mind distracted, perhaps careless with money as well as buttons. But in the immigrant neighbourhoods, packed with families from Ireland, Italy, Germany and beyond, a misbuttoned coat was invisible. Who cared about neatness when rent was overdue, when work meant hours in the garment factories, when a single meal of stew and bread meant comfort for the whole family? A crooked coat was survival. It kept the wind out, however unevenly. Step with me into a tenement kitchen. The room is small, the walls damp, but on the stove a pot simmers. The smell of onions, carrots and cabbage rises in steam. A child runs in, coat crooked, cheeks red from the cold, and no one bothers to fix it. Instead, a bowl of stew is ladled out, bread torn by hand, warmth shared. Isn't it always the case that food forgives what fashion scolds? Now imagine the theatres of New York. On stage, vaudeville performers played characters with crooked coats and oversized shoes, poking fun at the powerful. Audiences roared with laughter as pompous figures strutted, buttons undone, hats tilted wrong. The crooked line became a symbol of comedy, of resilience, of poking holes in the pride of the rich. Pause for a taste. Picture a bagel, fresh from a Lower East Side bakery, still warm, the crust crisp, the inside dense and chewy. Spread with cream cheese or dipped into hot coffee, it fills the mouth with comfort. The bagel doesn't care about symmetry. It is slightly misshapen, yet utterly perfect. New York in 1892 was a city of contrast, elegance and squalor, wealth and poverty, precision and chaos. The misbuttoned coat belonged to all of it. On Fifth Avenue, it was a mistake to be hidden. In the Bowery, it was part of life's crooked rhythm. In the theatres, it was laughter. In the streets, it was survival. Now step outside again. The snow falls softly onto cobblestones, covering crooked seams with even white. Carriages roll past, bells jingling, voices rising in a dozen languages. You walk slowly, your coat buttoned wrong, but you do not fix it. The city does not ask for perfection, it asks for movement, for endurance, for spirit. So breathe deeply now. Smell the chestnuts roasting, taste the warm bread, hear the laughter spilling from theatres, and feel the snow landing gently on your shoulders. Let the crooked coat of New York remind you, in a city always moving, flaws are just another step in the dance. And with that, let us leave New York's glowing streets and drift toward yet another crooked seam in the fabric of history. Now imagine Tokyo in 1892, a city balancing on the edge of tradition and modernity. The Meiji era was in full swing, and the streets were alive with contrasts. Rickshaws weaving past men in Western suits, women in silk kimonos walking beside soldiers in crisp uniforms, merchants calling out over the smell of grilled fish and steaming rice. Lanterns glowed outside tea houses, and the faint sound of a shamisen drifted through the evening air. Here in Japan, the misbuttoned coat was more than just a matter of style. It was tied to discipline. In a society where order and presentation were deeply valued, even a small crookedness was seen as carelessness. Imagine a government official stepping into a meeting eager to show that Japan could stand among the Western powers. His coat button is wrong. It is a tiny mistake, but in that moment, it is a symbol of weakness, a crack in the carefully cultivated image of modern precision. But step into the humbler districts, and the tone shifts. A student hurries along the street, books tucked under his arm, his coat buttoned wrong because he overslept after studying late into the night. His friends laugh, not unkindly, as they sit together under a paper lantern, slurping bowls of miso soup, steam rising like a soft mist. In youth and hunger, crookedness is forgiven. Pause for taste. Picture that miso soup, salty, earthy, with pieces of tofu drifting like small clouds and scallions floating green on the surface. The warmth spreads through your chest as you sip. Who cares about a button when soup fills you with peace? In the theatres of Tokyo, performers in kabuki and rakugo sometimes played characters with crooked coats. Clumsy officials mocked for their arrogance. The crooked line became humour, a way to soften the weight of expectation. Audiences chuckled quietly, knowing the truth behind the laughter. No matter how strict the rules, people remained imperfect. Yet discipline held its place. For soldiers in training, for students in uniform, for clerks in the new government offices, a misbutton was a breach of order. Teachers scolded, officers frowned, and parents adjusted their children's coats before sending them off to school. Crookedness was a lesson to be corrected, a small reminder that life demanded neatness. But the city itself was uneven. Wooden houses leaned beside brick buildings, alleys twisted, street stalls spilled into the roads, and trains rattled past shrines that had stood for centuries. Tokyo was misbuttoned by design, its seams crooked yet alive. Now walk with me into a tea house. The tatami mats are soft underfoot, the paper doors slide open with a whisper, and the air smells faintly of roasted tea leaves. You sit, coat still buttoned wrong, and a small cup is placed before you. The tea is bitter, earthy, calming. Outside, the wind rattles the paper screens, but inside, the crookedness of your coat feels like part of the stillness. So breathe deeply now. Hear the shamisen notes fading, taste the salt of soup, feel the soft mats beneath you. Let the crooked coat of Tokyo remind you, order matters, but imperfection breathes life into discipline. And with that, let us leave Japan's glowing lanterns and drift toward another crooked seam in the patchwork of history. Paris in 1892 was a city of light, a place where every street seemed to hum with a kind of restless elegance. Imagine yourself walking slowly along the wide boulevards, the glow of gas lamps fading now into the sharper light of new electric bulbs that buzzed faintly in the night. The cobblestones are cool underfoot, the air touched with the mingling scents of roasted chestnuts from a corner cart, butter melting on fresh bread from a bakery closing late, and the sharp perfume of women passing by in feathered hats. You pause for a moment and let the atmosphere wrap around you, like slipping into a warm bath. And yet, even here in the city that prided itself on being the capital of style, one could find something as small as a crooked button becoming a quiet social crime. Picture yourself stepping into a cafe near the Seine. The door jingles softly as it closes, the wood creaks beneath your boots, and the chatter of poets and painters fills the smoky air. Cigarette smoke curls slowly upward, like faint ghosts, blending with the sharp scent of strong coffee and the faint sweetness of pastries stacked behind the counter. You take a chair near the window and slide off your gloves, and then you notice a gentleman entering, his moustache curled just so, his suit pressed to perfection, and yet his coat misbuttoned by a single slot. The effect is subtle but unmistakable. One lapel riding higher than the other, the line broken, the symmetry gone. A whisper passes through the room, eyes glance quickly, then return to their cups, but the judgment lingers in the air like smoke. In Paris, elegance was a kind of currency, and a crooked button was like counterfeit coin. But then, follow me north, away from the polished boulevards into Montmartre, where cobbled streets wind upward, and the mood is far looser. Here in the shadow of the windmills, the cafes spill over with song and laughter. At Le Chat Noir, the famous cabaret glowing with lanterns, artists lounge in mismatched chairs, their coats rumpled, their hair untamed, their scarves frayed with use. A poet takes the stage, coat misbuttoned, collar skewed, and the audience laughs with delight, not at his mistake, but at the statement it makes. Crookedness here is rebellion. A coat buttoned wrong is proof that one cares more about art than appearances, more about passion than polish. In Montmartre, neatness was conformity, and crookedness was freedom. Now, imagine the flavours of Paris at that time. A fresh baguette broken open with a satisfying crackle, steam rising from its soft interior. Butter, cool and golden, melting instantly into the warm bread. The sweetness of a delicate macaron, almond and raspberry clinging to the tongue like a whisper of summer. A bowl of onion soup arrives at a cafe table, its rich aroma curling upward, the melted cheese stretching as the spoon dips in. With each bite you taste warmth, comfort, and the deep history of French kitchens. Who could care about a crooked seam when the world tasted like this? And yet the city was a stage, and on its stages, crookedness became comedy. At the Folies Bergère, a buffoon character often strutted about with his coat misbuttoned, the crowd roaring with laughter at his clumsy pride. Everyone in the audience had known that sting, the realization that something so small could undo one's dignity. They laughed not just at the actor, but at themselves. In humour, Crookedness was forgiven. Above all this, towering over Paris, stood the new Eiffel Tower. Only 3 years old, it was still controversial. Many had called it ugly, awkward, even crooked against the skyline, and yet, day by day, it was becoming beloved. Visitors climbed its steel arches, couples met beneath its shadow, and already it was being stitched into the fabric of the city. The Eiffel Tower was, in its way, the greatest misbuttoned coat of all. Once ridiculed, now cherished. Proof that what seems crooked at first can become the very symbol of beauty. Later, imagine yourself in a small cafe near midnight. The lamps are dim, the voices hushed, the air heavy with the smell of coffee and wood smoke. You order a simple fruit tart, thin pastry filled with custard, glazed apples shining faintly in the low light. The tart melts on your tongue, sweet and soft, as you sip a tiny cup of strong black coffee. Around you, the last patrons murmur quietly, scarves pulled close, coats buttoned tight, some neatly, some not. You notice your own coat has slipped out of line, a button fastened wrong, but here in the gentle hum of Paris at midnight, no one cares. The crooked seam becomes a kind of charm, a reminder that perfection is not necessary for belonging. So what was a misbuttoned coat in Paris in 1892? On the boulevards, it was scandal, a mark against elegance. In Montmartre, it was the banner of freedom. On stage, it was comedy. Beneath the Eiffel Tower, it was a metaphor for the city itself. Awkward at first, unforgettable later. Paris was never truly straight, never perfectly polished, but it was always alive, always glowing. Like a coat buttoned one hole off, it carried its imperfections with pride, turning crookedness into art. Now, close your eyes and let the hum of Paris fade into silence. The clatter of horse carriages grows faint, the glow of lamps softens, and the warmth of bread and wine lingers on your tongue. You feel the seam of your coat pressing against your chest, not perfect but perfectly human. Let the crooked line guide you toward rest. Let it remind you that even in the most elegant city, mistakes become part of the beauty. And with that, we leave Paris behind, drifting toward the next crooked corner of history waiting just beyond the edge of sleep. Imagine now a different city, not Paris with its polished boulevards, but London in the same year, 1892. The fog rolls in from the Thames like a soft grey blanket, wrapping lampposts and narrow lanes in a quiet haze. The gaslights glow dimly, flickering as though tired themselves, and the sound of carriage wheels on cobblestones echoes faintly in the damp night air. People hurry along the pavements, collars turned up against the chill, boots splashing through puddles. London was a city of order, or at least it liked to imagine itself so. But here too, a misbuttoned coat could raise an eyebrow, a silent judgment tucked neatly behind the stiff upper lip of Victorian society. Picture a gentleman stepping into a gentleman's club off Pall Mall. The room smells of pipe tobacco, leather chairs and brandy, warm and heavy. A fire crackles in the grate, flames licking at logs with a soft hiss. The men gathered there are polished, precise, their waistcoats snug, their cravats tied with studied neatness. Then enters one fellow, his coat skewed, a button slipped into the wrong hole. To you or me it might seem small, barely worth mention, but here it is a whisper of disorder, a suggestion that he does not quite belong. He might smile, settle into a chair, order a glass of port, yet he feels the weight of eyes upon him, subtle but unyielding. In London's halls of power, crookedness was not comedy but suspicion. If a man could not align his buttons, could he align his loyalties, his duties, his place in the order of things? But step outside those smoky clubs and wander east, toward the bustling markets. Covent Garden, still filled with carts of vegetables and baskets of fruit. The cries of hawkers rise above the clatter, selling pears, apples, onions by the bushel. Here, coats are buttoned any which way, or not at all. A fishmonger wipes his hands on a stained apron, laughing as he sells the catch of the day. A young boy scampers past, his coat too big, buttons mismatched, trailing behind him like a flag of freedom. No one here minds crookedness, for survival is more important than symmetry. In these crowded markets, a misbuttoned coat is simply the mark of hurry, of work, of life spilling over the seams. Let us pause a moment to taste what London offered then. Picture a warm meat pie, flaky crust golden and crisp, steam rising as your fork cuts through to rich gravy and tender chunks of beef. Imagine the earthy flavour of stewed eels, once a staple along the river, seasoned simply, their texture soft and slippery, not unlike a dish designed more for comfort than elegance. Or think of a sweet bun, glazed and sticky, filled with currants, the kind you might buy from a street seller to warm your hands on a cold, foggy evening. Each bite a reminder that food forgives all, even a crooked button. Now think of the theatres along the Strand lit brightly against the fog. On stage, characters in farce often wore coats misbuttoned, playing the fool to peals of laughter from the audience. London, like Paris, turned crookedness into comedy when it suited. But beneath the laughter there lingered the sharp truth that the city was built upon discipline, routine, and the illusion of straight lines. To be crooked in dress was to be crooked in life, at least in the eyes of those who enforced the rules. And yet, London itself was full of crookedness. Its alleys twisted, its fog obscured, its very skyline uneven with spires, domes, and chimneys belching smoke. The city was not straight, but it carried itself with the confidence of one who pretends otherwise. A misbuttoned coat was a mirror of London itself, untidy, imperfect, but undeniably alive. Imagine walking along the embankment as the evening grows late. The river laps softly against the stone walls, the lights flicker and shimmer on the water's surface. The air is damp, cool, and faintly metallic with the scent of the Thames. You pull your coat closer, realizing as you do that it is misbuttoned. The seam feels odd against your chest, but instead of shame, you smile. In the quiet of the river's edge, no one notices, no one minds. The crooked seam is simply part of the night, like the drifting fog or the uneven footsteps echoing down the path. So in London, as in Paris, a misbuttoned coat carried different meanings depending on where one walked. In the clubs of power, it was a mark of suspicion. In the markets, it was nothing at all. On stage, it was laughter. Along the river, it was simply human. London in 1892 was not neat, not perfect, not straight, yet it carried its crookedness with pride, even if it pretended otherwise. Close your eyes now and hear the soft hiss of the gas lights, the gentle lapping of the river, the distant rattle of a carriage fading into fog. Feel the uneven seam of your coat as it presses against you, imperfect yet comforting. In the crookedness there is warmth, in the imperfection there is belonging. Let the city fade as you drift, carried by fog into the quiet spaces of sleep. Now, let us drift away from Europe for a while and imagine the streets of New York in 1892. The city was loud, chaotic, and buzzing with a kind of restless energy that pulsed day and night. The sound of horses clattering along Broadway, the whistle of steam from ferries docking along the harbour, the voices of vendors calling from push carts crowded with apples, pretzels, and roasted peanuts. It all blended into a constant hum that never seemed to quiet. New York was a place where people from every corner of the world rubbed shoulders, sometimes uncomfortably, sometimes joyfully, but always with a sense of movement, of something just beginning. In this city of immigrants, where clothing often marked where one came from or how much one had, even something as small as a misbuttoned coat could spark a quiet reaction. Imagine a banker walking swiftly down Wall Street, his black coat sharp, his collar stiff, but one button slipped wrong. To the eyes of his peers, it might look careless, almost sloppy, and whispers would follow him into the marble halls of finance. But just a few blocks away, in the crowded tenements of the Lower East Side, a misbutton was nothing at all. Children ran through the hallways with coats too large, buttons mismatched or missing entirely, their laughter bouncing off the peeling walls. Mothers carried baskets of laundry, their aprons crooked, and no one gave it a second thought. There, crookedness was simply part of survival, one seam in a patchwork of bustling life. Walk with me into one of those tenement kitchens. The ceilings are low, the air thick with steam from pots bubbling on small stoves. You catch the scent of garlic sizzling, onions softening, cabbage boiling, bread baking. Each room smells different because each family has carried recipes from their homeland. You might taste pierogi stuffed with potatoes and cheese from a Polish family next door, or niches filled with onions and dough baked golden by a Jewish baker down the street. A misbuttoned coat is unnoticed when hands are busy kneading dough, stirring soup, or feeding hungry mouths. Crookedness here is human, and hunger is the only judge. But then, picture the theatres of New York bright along Broadway. Just as in London and Paris, a character with a misbuttoned coat was often the fool, the comic relief. The audience laughed heartily, recognizing in the crooked seam a reflection of their own clumsy mornings, their own hurried departures. Comedy, after all, was one of the few places where crookedness could be celebrated. The stage gave permission to laugh at what life often punished. And yet, in New York, crookedness sometimes carried another meaning: ambition. Imagine a young immigrant boy rushing to a factory job before dawn, his coat buttoned hastily, crooked, because every second mattered. He does not pause to fix it, for he knows he is late, and lateness could cost him the day's wage. To those who saw him, the crooked coat might have looked careless, but in truth it was proof of determination, of running headlong toward opportunity. In this city, even mistakes could be symbols of striving. Let us pause here for a taste of New York itself. Think of a bagel boiled and baked, its crust chewy, its center soft, still warm in your hand. Picture spreading cream cheese across it, the cool tang cutting into the warmth of the bread. Or imagine biting into a slice of pizza. Yes, it was only just beginning to appear in America at the time. Brought by Italian immigrants, simple dough topped with tomatoes and herbs, baked hot and quick. The flavor is rustic, honest, more about sustenance than perfection. Food, like a crooked coat, did not need to be perfect to bring comfort. Now step into Central Park, designed to be the lungs of the city. Even here, amid the trees and paths, the city's crookedness shows. The benches are uneven, the paths twist and turn, and the skyline beyond is jagged with chimneys and towers rising unevenly. A man sits on a bench, his coat askew, watching his children chase each other in the grass. He leans back, closes his eyes, and breathes deeply, the crooked seam across his chest unnoticed, unimportant. In that moment, crookedness is a kind of freedom, a reminder that life is not meant to be perfectly aligned. New York in 1892 was a patchwork quilt stitched with crooked seams. Uptown, misbuttoning was a social crime, a mark of carelessness. Downtown, it was survival, humor, or ambition. On stage, it was laughter. In kitchens, it was forgotten. The city itself was misbuttoned, its streets uneven, its people mismatched, yet altogether it formed something vibrant, something alive. Close your eyes now and hear the distant whistles of ferries, the rumble of carriages, the laughter of children echoing between brick walls. Smell the bread, the garlic, the roasted chestnuts. Feel the uneven line of your coat pressing against you as you sit in the park, imperfect but real. New York does not ask for perfection. It asks only that you keep moving, keep striving, keep living, crooked seams and all. Let that thought carry you gently now, as the city's hum fades into a softer dream, and you drift onward to the next place, the next crooked story waiting in the folds of history. Now we come to the last stretch of our long wandering, and tonight our steps take us not to Paris or London or New York, but to the quieter corners of small towns in 1892, places where the air smelled of wood smoke and fresh hay, where church bells marked the hours and the streets were more dirt than cobblestone. Picture yourself walking down a main street lined with wooden storefronts, the sign of a bakery painted in fading letters, a blacksmith's forge clanging somewhere down the lane, and the faint sweet scent of molasses cookies drifting from a kitchen window. Life here was simpler, or at least slower, and yet even in these humbler settings, a misbuttoned coat could carry its own quiet meanings. Imagine a Sunday morning, the church filled with families dressed in their best. Men straighten their collars, women smooth their skirts, children squirm impatiently in pews. And there, just there, a man sits, his coat buttoned wrong, one side crooked against the other. It is not scandal, not a crime, but it does catch the eye. Perhaps a neighbour leans in to whisper. Perhaps a child giggles softly. In a small town where everyone knew everyone else, the tiniest slip could ripple like a pebble tossed into a pond. But just as quickly as it was noticed, it was forgotten, replaced by the rhythm of hymns, the rustle of pages, the soft hum of voices rising together. Step out of the church and into the warmth of a kitchen after service. A pie cools on the windowsill, its golden crust bubbling with cherries or apples. The room smells of butter and sugar, the floorboards creak underfoot, and the stove radiates a gentle heat. A family gathers around the table, passing plates of biscuits, ladling stew from a large pot. Coats are shrugged off, hung haphazardly by the door, misbuttoned or not, and no one cares. Here, crooked seams mean nothing when the air is full of laughter and the clinking of spoons. But small towns had their own ways of turning crookedness into story. In the evenings, when neighbours gathered on porches or around fire pits, a man might tell the tale of rushing out to catch a train or to meet the mayor, only to realise hours later his coat had been misbuttoned the whole time. The story would draw laughter, not judgment, for in the telling the mistake became a shared memory, part of the fabric of community life. Crookedness was forgiven because it was familiar. Everyone had been there, in one way or another. Even in schools, children laughed when a teacher entered with a button wrong, whispering to each other until the teacher, realizing, blushed and corrected it. For a moment the classroom softened, the stern rules bent, the crooked line reminding everyone that even authority could stumble. Crookedness in those moments brought people closer, softened the edges of strictness. Let's pause to taste something of that world. Imagine biting into a warm cornbread muffin, its edges crisp, its inside soft and crumbly, with a hint of honey melting on top. Or think of gingerbread, spiced and sweet, its scent filling the whole house in the chill of winter. These were foods made not for perfection but for comfort, foods that welcomed crooked seams and uneven hands, for the warmth came not from precision but from care. As the evening comes in that small town, lanterns are lit, fires glow in hearths, and the sound of crickets rises outside. You sit on a rocking chair, your coat buttoned wrong without your knowing, the wood creaking gently beneath you. The stars begin to prick the dark sky above, and the night air carries the smell of grass and distant smoke. In the hush of the countryside, crookedness fades into the background, just another part of the quiet rhythm of life. And so, in Paris it was scandal, in London it was suspicion, in New York it was ambition, and in small towns it was simply human. A misbuttoned coat was never just a seam, it was a mirror of the place it appeared, a reflection of how societies judged, forgave, or laughed at imperfection. It was the tiniest of errors, and yet it told the biggest of truths, that no one is perfectly aligned, that all of us walk with crooked seams, and that perhaps it is in those seams that the true stories of life are stitched. Now, as we close this long journey, settle yourself more deeply into your blanket. Hear again the soft crackle of the fire, the faint hum of night outside your window, the rhythm of your own breath slowing, steady. May the crooked buttons of history remind you that imperfection is not failure but charm, that mistakes are not crimes but companions. Let yourself drift now, not into worry, but into rest, carried gently on the uneven threads of time. And if this quiet wandering has helped you, if it has eased your steps towards sleep, you may softly tap like or subscribe, but only if it feels right. For now, let go. May these memories guide you into peaceful dreams. If you drifted off somewhere along the way, let me know below. Sweet dreams. Until next time, this is your storyteller whispering good night.